Hi, welcome to Hey Look at My Thing with Keegan Reynolds, Rachel Bennett, and Aaron Irons. On this podcast, we share things we are enthusiastic about with our friends. And this week, we are sharing Columbo.
Every time you do that, you have such a kind of pensive mood about it that right afterward, I hear the opening from the theme to CSI Miami. He puts on the sunglasses and he goes, "Yeah!" And that's what I hear literally every time you finish doing one of those.
All right. Welcome to the show. So, as is tradition, I am going to ask my co-hosts if they have ever heard of my thing, which is the TV show Columbo.
Funny you should mention that because this week it has come up 2 or 3 times in meetings at work, and I am just floored that is even a possibility. But here we are. I know that he is kind of an investigator of sorts, and that he uses psychological techniques to get people to admit fault in something without realizing they're admitting fault. And just one more thing, he has a catchphrase that he uses quite often in order to extract information from people.
Wow, you know so much more than I do. So I was on a trip to visit some people who are in our pod from moving with Mark, and asked him because Keegan had asked me if he had any recollection of Columbo. And so he starts going into this spiel, right? And he's like, oh, it's this and this and this, and this is how it's different from other things, and it's like this. And then as he's talking, he starts I see his eyebrows start to furrow together a little bit, and he's slowing down and kind of grasping at details more. And eventually he looks at me. And I was relieved to see he wasn't having a stroke or anything. And he goes, I'm thinking of Magnum PI. I was cool, great, babe. Thank you so much for the very helpful summary of Magnum PI. So if you have any questions about Magnum PI, I have a lot of secondhand knowledge. But as far as what I've learned, if I'm wrong and he doesn't have a mustache, I'm thinking of Tom Selleck. And that's it. That's everything I know about Columbo.
Okay.
Great.
Does he have a gun? He solves mystery. I don't fucking know. See, that's it. I'm out. I'm tapped out.
All right.
So nothing.
All right.
Aside from being a 80s icon, late 70s, 80s.
All right. 70s? So yeah. So it starred Peter Falk, who you may know as the grandfather in The Princess Bride, or the father in Corky Romano.
No, that is not a thing.
I refuse to acknowledge that that's real.
Corky Romano?
50% here, Keegan.
It's a great movie.
Better than your average, to be fair.
Yeah. So there were 2 pilots done, one in 1968, and then they tried again in 1971, and then it was picked up, and it ran for about 8 years as one of the TV mysteries of the week, because the show is about an hour to hour and a half. So they would only play about 1 or 2 Columbos a month during that kind of 8-year period, and it would be in a rotation with other mysteries that they would show once a week.
So it was every night they had a different, almost mystery movie rather than a TV show the way we would expect a TV show.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is motion picture length.
Yeah, okay. It's pretty long. Then they took a break for about 10 years. They came back in 1989 and did 10 episodes that year. And then they did about 1 a year, kind of specials from 1990 to 2003. So they did a total of 69 episodes.
Nice.
Yes, nice. Very nice. It won 13 Emmys and 2 Golden Globes, and is widely considered one of the best shows that was ever on television. It makes all the lists of best shows ever, best cop shows ever, best written shows ever, that kind of
Okay,
stuff.
That's like a word.
so here's the
Yeah.
thing that like Mark started off with, right? And I'm curious if this is the right vibe to go in with. He said it's kind of like a dude version of Murder, She Wrote.
It is. It has kind of that vibe. The kind of spin that is different than most other detective shows is it's not a whodunit. The opening scene is the murderer killing the person and you seeing them do it. Okay?
Okay.
So that is the opening. That is how it opens up. What you watch is Columbo try to figure out how he did it and then how to catch him. And usually the murderer is a famous celebrity. They've been not a celebrity in the show, but they've been played by a lot of famous celebrities. They've been played by Martin Landau, Johnny Cash, Dick Van Dyke, George Hamilton, Hector Alonso, Ricardo Montalban, Faye Dunaway, Rip Torn, Leonard Nimoy, and William Shatner twice.
Okay.
So you got about 50% of people I know in that
You're
list.
still at 50%, actually.
Yeah. The killers are almost uniformly clever and upper class and narcissistic. And
Cool. That we should propagate.
Very relatable.
yeah, and he goes in there and plays a kind of a low status character. He's very apologetic and he's very polite and he's kind of absent minded and he's very earnest and he's always like fascinated about whatever thing they do for their life. Like if they're an architect, he like was like, oh, tell me all about architecture, and he's really unassuming and he just kind of like wheedles his way into their lives, and just finds little things that don't make sense, little details that stick out. And he always seems to zero in on who the murderer is very early. And sometimes it's because of these little clues. But overall, I think the idea is he's an incredible cold reader of people. And when he's confronted with like all the people kind of associated with that murder, he almost just instinctively can tell this person has something to do with it, and then he just picks at them a little bit more and finds more and more things that add up to them being the murderer. And he usually in some way tricks them into revealing guilty knowledge or confessing outright or doing something that would show that they had lied and were more than likely guilty of the crime. Now, the plots are good, but there's plot holes. Like a lot of the times at the end, you're like, well, that person would not be convicted. There's like very little evidence, and the way they kind of got them to halfway confess isn't really going to stand up in court. But it's fun anyway. He has a lot of uh, specific things that carry over every episode. He is always carrying a cigar. He's got a rumpled raincoat. He drives the same kind of crappy car throughout the entire series. A lot of the times, at least one of the scenes, he'll bring his basset hound named Dog. The just one more thing catchphrase. He always introduced himself as Lieutenant Columbo. He never says his first name in the entire run of the series.
Is there like
he-
a canon answer to what it is?
I think there is. I think in one of the episodes where he shows his badge, they like zoomed in on it, like somebody on the internet did, and like figured out what his name was. But I think it's been different on a couple different badges, so it's not like solidly that. And then he also mentions his wife a lot. He'll tell like stories about his family, like, oh, my brother-in-law or my wife or my kid nephew, just to kind of bring up some subject he wants to bring up with the suspect. But you never see any of these people. So they might not even be real.
Hmm.
And kind of his last trait is he's really is kind of relentless. Once he thinks he knows what's going on, he's gonna get to where he wants to get to. Um, I have enjoyed this show for a long time. I remember in the 90s, my mom would watch a lot of like mystery stuff like Murder She Wrote, and um, Columbo would come on very rarely, but I remember when it did come on, that was like the one I actually wanted to watch.
Mm.
When they showed like different sort of mystery specials. Um, and he's a fairly famous character. It's probably the thing Peter Falk is known for the best. Maybe The Princess Bride, but this obviously went on for over 30 years, and was a very large part of his life.
Right.
All right. That's probably good for us to have a background. Um, how about we jump in and see what this is all about?
Sounds good.
Love it.
See you on the other side.
Yeah.
Boy. Hey friends, we sure hope that you're having fun and a relaxing time during this episode. We really had a blast with this one. Hey, speaking of having a fun and relaxing time, you know what else is a fun and relaxing time? Joining Aaron's delightful Twitch streams where he jams on piano. You may or may not know, but he is the composer of our jaunty intro tune and the music that you hear playing underneath this ad break right now. And he's a gifted pianist. He's worked really hard and is really good and loves to jam out on piano. And he's recently started streaming it on Twitch. So you can check him out on twitch.tv/Elrim208. That is Elrim, Elrim. He has been known to take requests on occasion and mostly plays some rad video game and or Miyazaki music and is just generally lovely and jamming and adorable. So I cannot recommend it enough if you have a little bit of extra time stopping in and checking him out. Additionally, if you instead have a little bit of extra money, I mean, I suppose you could just like Venmo it to Aaron and that would be fine. But it also might be a good time to think about supporting your local public radio station. We are all lovers of music and lovers of information, especially good information. And public radio is a great way to get and broadcast that in many situations. So here we have Iowa Public Radio, which has like a super great jazz segment and does a bunch of cool stuff. But if you are not here in the lovely state of Iowa, reach out, see who your public radio station is, and see if you can throw a couple bucks their way. All right, that's everything for this week. We love you, and we will see you next time.
All right, we are back. And we have watched a probably the longest thing we have done so far.
To date.
I think so, yeah.
All right, you want to start out with our traditional Aaron giving a recap of what we saw?
Absolutely. So this is a mystery, as we were already led to understand. And as you had previously mentioned, the onset of this tale starts with, we already know what's going on. We see the murder happen, and the great thing about this kind of twist on an old mystery is that we get to see just how convoluted a murderer tries to make the story look in order to prove their innocence. And it allows us to see so many extra layers that go on in it. We'll come back to that, but let's talk about the actual happenings. There is a uncle at the piano. The nephew Dale comes in, and while he in the middle of his playing, he shoots him. He drops dead. He puts a heating blanket. The surviving nephew puts a heating blanket on the uncle, goes around the house and plants evidence as he sees it to make it look like a break-in. He is joined by a art student named Tracy or Mila. I think Tracy's her art name, but I don't know where Mila comes from, but I heard it once. He gives her these really expensive paintings. There's this elaborate heist. She runs off with the paintings as the security guard is in. The Dale goes off to a party to give himself a good alibi. It's like airtight. So that's how the whole thing shapes as a crime. And then Columbo comes in and is asking an obnoxious number of questions. And yeah, his character, we'll have to talk about that, but he's a character for sure. He comes in, really nails down on a couple of things. He's always trailing Dale specifically because he's the one who did it. But Dale is constantly throwing things in his face that say, I didn't do this, I didn't do this, I didn't do this, because, you know, here's my alibi and it's airtight and there's so much evidence pointing to somebody else, which he plants evidence on his aunt, who is divorced from his uncle. And all of these things culminate to a will that leaves all of his the uncle's possessions to her. The gun ends up in her garden. There's paper from his manor or mansion where the things were stolen. And eventually the paintings show up in her house. Now, Columbo has been annoyingly close at watching Dale. And the way that he ends up catching this criminal is that he is with Dale when he has these paintings in his possession, but won't let Columbo touch them or look at them, I should say. But Columbo reaches in and grabs the paintings that Dale says is something else. And then eventually they're doing a fingerprint analysis on the paintings. And Dale says, well, my fingerprints are going to be all over them because I touched these paintings when putting them up in the first place. So it can't possibly be me, or those fingerprints mean nothing. And then Columbo says, well, I touched these paintings and I never touched them unless I was with you. And therefore you must be the criminal. Boom. Mic drop.
Wait, but you forgot, because he starts screaming and screaming and screaming, and then Columbo pulls out hands that he's had in his pockets the whole time with gloves on them.
Yes.
And we're all like, oh, dang. Oh, man, you fucking showed him. Yeah, for sure.
So I've been doing a lot of talking, but I want to kick this off with the layers of this. And it can only be done when you know everything that's going on to show these number of layers and how the criminal thinks they're making their case airtight. And I really like that about the show and about the way it presents it. Is there's so many people who think they're so good at crime, and you're not, honey. You are not good at crime. And this is just a perfect example of somebody who says to themselves, I'm going to be so good at this crime. And they do it and they try and pull it off. And somebody just catches them and says, no, you're not as good as you think you are. Go directly to jail. Do not collect $200.
Yeah, I think it did it did seem really well written, just in like a variety of ways. And also, I assume, well directed. The way that Columbo kind of plays the idiot when it's immediately apparent he isn't, right? Like, okay, so because of who I am as a person, when we first meet Columbo, because this is our first time meeting him, he is standing kind of in the hallway and immediately draws this guy aside to talk to him about some paintings. And you know me. So I was like, all right, I'm here. I'm ready. So it was really hard for me to focus for like the first, that was my dog's ears flapping. He's got really flappy ears. It was really hard
so cute.
for me. It was really hard for me to focus for the first, like, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because I spent all the time like trying to figure out who the artists were. And I was delighted because they seemed to know their shit, and they had a lot of like kind of obscure contemporary artists. So one of the ones that I didn't know, or I guess recognize the art of, but couldn't have placed with the name, is Birnbaum. Well, I actually took a second to look up, and he's my new favorite thing ever. I'm sending you in Discord a painting that he made. He's like a folk artist, but at the time it would have been super contemporary. Like he was just becoming a thing. So they either did their research, or more likely had one of the billion art majors who isn't working in their field sit down and be like, "Hey, what up?" Right? Like it proved to be really, really well written again and again and again in ways that were surprising from something where I expected, like, I don't know, camp, I guess. I expected more camp.
You know what struck me, and this may not have sat in your memory as much, but the painting over the fireplace, it screamed Monet to me, and I don't know if it was Monet, but I want it to be Monet. I want you to validate that.
The one over the fireplace with the two people in the rowboat?
Yes.
Is that the one you're talking
It
about?
seemed
Okay.
impressionist. It seemed impressionist to me. Am I at least in the ballpark?
Yes, you super are. It is impressionist. I actually looked that one up because of how familiar it looked to me. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're right. And it was, I can't, okay, here's the thing. They're both impressionists. It's Monet and Manet, your two boys. One of them died from syphilis. And I can never remember which one. But yeah, no, you're completely on the ball. And like, that was a real one. The pastels that they're chasing after are obviously supposed to be Degas. And it's interesting as a choice, right? The way that the flops, the way that they telegraphed that is really interesting, because the thing that's definable about Degas is he was horny as fuck. He just like, this is real. He like exclusively creeped in ballet studios. And so when I was taking AP Art History and my professor was like preparing us for the exam, she was like, "You see a ballerina? It's Degas. Move on." And people are so horny for his horny ballerina paint. And they're not horny, really. They're like extremely lovely. But I don't know. You're like spending all day hanging out with ballerinas and literally nothing else, my dude. I don't know if that's horniness, but something is weird there. Yeah, they used a lot of real art, which is a thing. The other person that they talked about as well, at that like burn bomb thing, is also a real person, de Groot, and does do like faceless art and was super contemporary at the time, and like, I don't know, probably being like featured in the New York Times and shit, but it's just like a real sort of like time bomb of them. They talk about Goya later, who's one of my favorites. This was a real like Rachel Art Corner episode, but not in the like way where I have thoughtful things to say, just in like me being a complete douche about like, oh, it's this, oh, that's a Renoir. Yeah, anyway, I'm done talking about the art. You shouldn't have picked such an arty episode, because it's like 90% of I talked about. My notes are me talking about the art and me bitching about the women.
Oh my God, that's all I have.
Aaron!
Okay.
Here for me.
One sec.
No, you don't get to excuse. No, wait.
No.
You don't get to excuse the women in this.
No, I'm not excusing the women. I just want to say there is a third thing we have to talk about, and that's his collection of velvet tuxedos.
Oh,
I'm coming back to the fashion. There's it's such like a time capsule of the 70s with like the set design. It's so good. All right, let's talk about the women, Aaron. You start.
Okay. So every time I go into every episode, the Bechdel test comes into my mind, and I look for it. I have to, and oh, did that fail? Oh, she failed.
Women were even on screen at the same time, much less talking to each other. Much less talking to each other without a man. They were either complete dunces who were like, "Oh, I'll do anything you ask of me as long as you help my art career." And oh no, you've killed me. Who could have seen this coming? Or they're fucking insufferable and will not shut up. Those are the only two women we see on. There's three of them technically. That's the only two women we see.
There is the prop police officer. They had to have someone and run away. So let's get the one female police officer. Yeah.
I totally forgot. Also, no, there wasn't. It was 1971. Like, how many female cops were there? She's like in the back. They're like, Jackie, get me the donuts. Like, that's not. I don't. How did they let her do police work? It's the 70s. Disgusting. Disgusting. The second woman, not counting Miss Police, who is honestly basically a blow up doll with extra steps at that point, but like, not counting her, the second woman came on screen, and I was like, this is what I thought it was. Yeah, okay, this is how this is going to be. Delightful. Love it.
Like are you talking about the lady at the art show?
Yep.
Yeah, she was insufferable.
So the lady at the art show, insufferable. His little like chippy girlfriend or whatever is like, oh my God, my hero. The landlady that he talks to, insufferable. His aunt, insufferable. So really, and can we talk about the fact that Auntie had to go because, well, I know you're ready to go do some shopping. Like, fuck off.
Yes.
Fuck off.
Anyway, another real bad scene.
First half of the episode looking at the art and being like, ooh, and the last half of the episode being like, fuck all these people. What the fuck is this? It's like a blind rage.
So, there's some even worse scenes with women. If you remember at the party when he's like talking about art and then laughing at his own joke and they're just like all laughing around him.
Oh my God, it's so bad. Here's the thing. So there was something. Okay, wait, I need to back up. It's so bad, but I really, really, again, appreciated the writing in that scene so much because it was like so wooden and shitty, right? And they clearly knew paintings and knew what they were talking about and understood art. And the things they were saying as a like quote unquote art critic were like, I think the sky's blue because he was sad, right? Like they had all the depth and complexity of your average sixth grade art interpretation. Like it's not, honestly, I have sixth graders who did a better job. Like it's not good. So I think it's a really interesting moment where the writing kind of shone for me because I was like, oh my God, it's because he's incredibly nervous. And that's why he's saying shit that makes him sound like a complete asshole. And people are laughing in a way that's really wooden and shitty because they recognize that he's being an asshole, but they feel like they're supposed to laugh, so they laugh. So for me, that was a moment of actually really superb acting that was very niche, but I don't know if it was supposed to be or if it was supposed to be bad. I don't know.
Yeah. Listen, there was one woman who I thought was redeeming, and that was the nude model in the art scene. She was sassy. She was funny. Yeah. She was cool. She didn't take shit. It was great.
Yep. But she and Art Lady should have had like 2 sentences together that had nothing to do with men, and they could have passed a simple test. Like that's all they needed to do. They were in the scene together.
Also, one woman, okay, I will admit, and things were different because it was the 70s, but I will admit one woman who's like sitting there and comfortable with her sexuality. She's like naked and flirting with this guy, right? And I think what we're supposed to think is like, oh, what a slut or whatever. But instead what I thought was, yeah, get it, bitch. Because I'm approaching this from, oh God, 50 years later.
Yeah, almost exactly 50 years later.
Yeah. So just like my perspective on her has changed, but I would assume that what they intended at the time, that tone was not as like loving and affirmative as I see it now. Yep. Unfortunately. I'd like to believe otherwise, Keeghan, but...
Yeah. In the show, there are a healthy number of female murderers who are real people. Like, they're much more fleshed out. They're not caricatures. Now they are incredibly narcissistic and they are murderers, but they give them the screen time and the lines and the kind of gravitas that they do the same with the male murderers. So I don't know why it's only if it's the main character, they do that, but if it's somebody who's not the main character, they don't.
I do have a follow-up question.
Yes.
A fuck, if you were to denote that as an abbreviation, an acronym. Here's my follow-up question. How often are the baddies women, though? Like, would you say 1 in every 10, 1 in every
Uh,
15?
I would say 1 in 3.
Wow.
I have a list right here of the Columbo murderers.
Okay.
But it's fairly regularly.
I want to back up a little bit though, because there
Yeah.
is a thing that, like, if we're talking 1970s, so women will get some screen time, but let's take this a little bit adjacent to, say, another minority like gays.
Mm.
You will not see them almost at all in this time period, except as villains. And not
Mm,
often, but like, if they're a villain, they're gonna make them villainous. And
Mm.
I kind of have issue with villains being minorities too often, because it kind of has that same negative effect, because you're not showing them in any bit of a positive light.
Right. Also,
yeah, there's good.
speaking of minorities, there were 2 black people in this episode. It was at the art party. One of them was a serving boy. Cool. I'm done.
Yeah, yeah. In the later seasons, like even just like season 2 and 4, and we've been kind of rewatching here at the house. A lot of the other policemen will be Mexican or Latino. It does do like better almost after that first season. Like I mean it's it was the early 70s. I'm not going to say it's a good thing, but or like it's a appropriate thing, but they did work on that as just like a couple years went on. The
Well, we
murderers
love
are
to see growth.
almost always white though. You
Yep.
had a couple like there was Roberto, or was it Ricardo Montalban and Hector Alessandro? They weren't, but they are the like real rarities. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of women here. I'd say 1 in 3, 1 in 4. It's a fair amount.
Well, I appreciate that the actresses at that time had a chance to play a role that was even vaguely complex or well thought out, outside of
Yeah.
theoretically some Shakespeare. I really appreciate that.
So a couple things that Columbo is known for is obviously those tropes I said, but also they usually have a reveal along those lines. And there's some that are really good, and there's some that you're like, well, that wouldn't work at all. This one is, I think, one of the best when he pulls his hands out of his pockets and the dude is just like, breaking down, and they keep turning the camera back to the lawyer and the aunt, and they're just like looking back and forth to them like it's a tennis match. It was pretty fun. The only one there's there's a ton of really good ones. The one with Dick Van Dyke is really good because you guys know who Dick Van Dyke is, right?
Yes, that's one of the
Yes.
ones I know. It's because he was in Mary Poppins and like a whole
Yeah.
bunch of musical theater. That's the reason we know him.
So he plays a really kind of like just mean dude. Like he just plays so out of character for Dick Van Dyke. Just very cold. And his at the end is super good. The one with, I assume you guys know who Johnny Cash is.
Yes.
Yeah, the one with Johnny Cash where he's the murderer is kind of cathartic at the end. And there's some really good ones. There's a couple people that aren't like big stars that came back and played murderers a bunch of times because they were like, I don't know, really liked by the writers or the directors. I don't know. But there's been people who did like 6 episodes.
Huh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've touched on what this show does really well, and the mystery writing, like it does what it intends to do really well. We've also touched on things that after 50 years, through the lens of our generation and needing to speak up on things that are not okay, we look back at this and say, oof, was that ever not okay? And I think the third thing that we need to touch on is a little more neutral, but this was 1971 and you could feel it coming through the camera, just how stylized everything was.
Their apartment, the one girl's apartment.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So first thing I notice is they're in a freaking mansion and they've got green carpet.
And not like a deep forest green or like a kind of beigey olive, like neon Mountain Dew piss green, like terrible, a truly nightmarish, like shag polyester green. It was abysmal.
The house I grew up in was built in the 70s or late 60s, early 70s. We had that exact shade of carpet in our living room. Yes, I'm serious. It was the same shade of carpet.
That's awful. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, it were bad.
And obviously the costuming, like the way the accomplice lady was dressed, and the way he was dressed, and the way the people at the art party were dressed.
And his fucking sunglasses at the end. I just almost lost my shit. When he put on those gigantic ass, square ass, chrome yellow lensed glasses, I woke up my dog. I let out a shout of delight and alarm. So
I just
good.
love how
so deeply 70s.
I love how close it is to the 60s and how much you can tell, like, it's 71. We haven't hit like the bell bottoms like disco yet. We're still clearly like 2 years from Woodstock, and it showed really cleanly in this episode.
Legitimately, it almost felt like an Austin Powers like ripoff to me, because like that's my point of reference, right? That's like my touchstone for that. So I looked at the whole thing and I was like, oh my God, this feels like cheap, like broke Austin Powers. No, well, just actual 70s.
When we think about the 60s, we really think about like 1969 in Woodstock. So, and that does bleed over into the 70s. Like, it's easy to like put everything into a decade, but if you look at like 1961, it's pretty much still the 50s. Like, it's still kids rolling up cigarettes in their white t-shirts. Like,
AKA 2020. Got it.
Yeah.
So a couple little things. This was, season 1 that we watched season 1, episode
6,
somewhere between 6. For some reason, Google disagrees, but we'll say 6. Like he hadn't got some of his trademark things. You didn't really see. You saw his car just for a second, but he usually like mentions his car, like he specifically points it out. I think he barely mentioned his wife.
He did for shopping. I can tell you.
When it came to the shopping, he was like, "Oh, she forgets that I'm outside waiting for her when she's shopping." Women, aren't they dumb?
Usually, there's like 2 or 3 Mrs. Columbo sightings in an episode, and you didn't get to see his fun
She's
fun
not
puppy.
Like a person, is she?
Yeah.
Or does she show up in person?
I think she's real, because there's times when like he's not around the murderer when he gets a call from her.
No. I believe that he is like actually married. Like, from a writing perspective, does this character actually show up on stage, or is she just like a thing, an object he can reference? Yeah. Okay, great.
Cool. Yep.
Definitely a prop.
Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And he uses her. He like not just like in the show as a prop. He uses her as a prop to just get a little more information, or most of the ends of the episodes are him tricking the murderer into doing something that they shouldn't do. Like in this case, he tricked, like he he tricked him into planning those paintings when he knew it would incriminate him. And that's I want to say that's like at least 75% of the time him tricking them into doing something instead of tricking them into saying something.
Well, and I mean that makes total sense because physical evidence is like, what does it matter if somebody in confidence to you says, "I murdered babies"? Like,
yeah.
Well, I mean, it alters my personal feelings about them pretty drastically, but I suppose aside from that, from a legal standpoint, nothing.
Yeah.
So a little point of trivia: the first non-pilot episode was directed by a young man named Steven Spielberg.
Oh,
I have heard,
and
guys, I've heard of that person.
yes, that one I know.
And the episode was written by Bochco, who made like I think like a ton of the Law and Orders. So it's fun to watch Columbo. That's why I watch it. It's because it's fun to watch. A lot of the times the plots aren't incredible, but he's always fun to watch. It's like, you know, seeing an old friend, and like the scenes at the end where the I gotcha moments, those are always fun to watch.
Yeah, I definitely got that sense. This kind of harkens me back to, say, like H.P. Lovecraft, where you cannot read that on face value and say this is good. Like you have to turn off a part of you that is like
the part that gives a shit about like old white dudes being racist.
Yeah. And there is an essence of it that is still really good, and it brings us to where we are today and gives us this it's not gothic horror, but Lovecraftian horror that has evolved into something really awesome because we shed the stuff that sucks.
Yeah.
And this type of media, it's hard to do that because it's with a show, it's still the way that it was, but you just got to turn off that part of your brain, or at least acknowledge it for 30 minutes on our episode of like, this is why it sucked.
Yeah.
And
just come listen to this episode again after you watch it and be like, they're so insightful and right. Yeah, that is
exactly.
It's
I
heteronormativity. That's been the problem the whole time. And you nod to yourself sagely, like, now I understand.
If we decided to get rid of everything that wasn't problematic, we couldn't watch anything. We couldn't watch. We couldn't watch almost anything made before, I don't know, 10 minutes ago. Okay,
I mean, yeah. I will say, here's where I'm placing this for me. I think because obviously I agree with Aaron. Obviously, like you're saying, Keeghan, like there has to be some kind of like balance somewhere where you can like acknowledge the issues and acknowledge that isn't good, and acknowledge that media affects the way we view others and affects the decisions we make and gets into us in insidious ways. That's why people tell stories, is because they affect other people, and really examine that. And once you've done that hard work, can you throw Columbo in the JoJo category where you're like, yeah, if I'm drunk, whatever? Yeah, I think so. I think that's a fair sort of home for it. The yeah, whatever, I'm drunk category.
Yeah, I would have to say there's a part of me that likes like media history, and I like to go really far back, and I have to acknowledge when I do that I don't like some of the things that I see. But that doesn't take away from the good things about it. It's just that I have to frame it differently, and I have to kind of approach it differently, and sometimes I can do that and just turn off that part of my brain that's like, this hurts me inside a lot. And there's sometimes that I have to take a break because I can't handle it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
If I was going to recommend somebody to watch Columbo, I would like kind of maybe pick and choose episodes. The second episode that William Shatner's in, and he just like chews the scenery like 90% of the episode, is so fun to watch. And then to see him get arrested because he's a bad person, it's really funny. And Leonard Nimoy, when he was the episode where he's the murderer, like seeing Leonard Nimoy like really act, like, you know, not just be Spock, but like do a whole different character, and you just see how talented he was in this role and how like locked in he was. That was like one of the best performances by one of the murderers I think I've seen.
I mean, it does seem like they had a pretty, I don't know, for the time, I guess, star-studded guest cast. So this is the kind of role that is like very cool for an established actor, right? You said that like Dick Van Dyke played a character who was like very cool and collected and intellectual. Like, and generally he's playing like a lovable goofus, right? So like this really gives them a chance to stretch in ways that's probably pretty cool and pretty fun.
Yeah. Well, I think we've touched on the major points of Columbo. Are there any closing thoughts, or should we give this? Go ahead.
I have one super small one. Remember how at the beginning I said he doesn't have a mustache? If you had put a gun to my head and lined me up with like 8 white boys in front of me and said I had to pick which one was Columbo or I'd die, I'd be gone. There is literally no way I ever would have, like, maybe if he talked, I could have associated his voice with like, oh yeah, he said that's the guy from The Princess Bride. Like his voice is similar, but like just looking at them, not in a million years, never would have known him.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No.
A complete blank spot in my brain where Columbo could have been and now is.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. We will catch you next time.
Bye.